Thank you for accessing Vocabulary Module 1, Selecting Vocabulary. This module is the first of 3 in a vocabulary tutorial series developed for the Teacher Collaboration Project between Rio Rancho Public Schools and the Southwest English Learners Partnership, a partnership within the Regional Educational Laboratory, or REL Southwest, a part of the National Center for Educational Evaluation and Regional Assistance within the U.S. Department of Education's Institute of Education Sciences. If this is not the first module that you've viewed in this tutorial, you can scrub ahead in the recording until you see a slide with a large purple star in the upper right-hand corner, which signals the start of new content. The content up until that slide is common to all 3 modules. We'll start today by presenting a brief overview of why vocabulary instruction is so important for English learner students. While it may seem intuitive that vocabulary would be especially valuable for students who speak a language other than English at home, it's useful to take a moment to review what makes vocabulary such a high leverage skill, not just for ELs and their ELD lessons, but for all students across content areas. The focus of this tutorial and the focus of our partnership as a whole is on supporting EL students' achievement. And for that, we look to the kinds of practices in instruction that are best supported by rigorous research. The latest Works Clearinghouse EL-focused practice guide, which was published in 2014, endorses academic vocabulary instruction as a very promising and strongly supported practice that comes from research and that we know works for cultivating EL's content knowledge and literacy skills. Together, there are 2 recommendations that are presented in this practice guide that are supported by strong evidence. And those recommendations emphasize 2 things. 1, integrating a variety of academic vocabulary instructional activities, and 2, doing so into content area teaching. So you can see the recommendations as articulated in that practice guide here. Focus on 1, teaching a set of academic vocabulary words intensively across several days using a variety of instructional activities, and 2, integrating oral and written English language instruction into content area teaching. These may seem simple, but there's a lot packed into these 2 recommendations. The Works Clearinghouse practice guides break their recommendations down into concrete implementation steps that you can actually bring to bear in your instruction. Each of our 2 recommendations that are the focus of this vocabulary tutorial include 4 concrete implementation steps that we'll go into different levels of detail on as we progress through the different tutorial modules. For recommendation 1, which reads, teach a set of academic vocabulary words intensively across several days using a variety of instructional activities, we have a focus on choosing a brief, engaging piece of informational text that includes academic vocabulary, choosing a small set of academic vocabulary for in-depth instruction, teaching academic vocabulary in depth using multiple modalities, including writing, speaking, and listening, and teaching word learning strategies to help students independently figure out the meaning of words. Those 4 implementation steps will give us the overarching structure of our 3 vocabulary tutorial modules, as I'll discuss on the next slide. But I wanted to draw your attention to the way that recommendation 2 is also spelled out in 4 implementation steps, which will be infused throughout the instruction that we offer here. The first implementation step for recommendation 2, which again is about integrating oral and written language instruction into content area teaching, talks about strategically using instructional tools like videos, visuals, and graphic organizers to anchor instruction and help students make sense of content, explicitly teaching the content-specific academic vocabulary as well as general academic vocabulary that supports it during content area instruction. The third implementation step talks about providing daily opportunities for students to talk about content in pairs or small groups. So this is oral language practice emphasis. And then provide writing opportunities to extend student learning and understanding of the content material. So as just mentioned, The 4 implementation steps that are contained in this recommendation 1 give us the structure of the 3 modules for this vocabulary tutorial. And we can extract from those 4 implementation steps these 3 different focuses that we'll go into in some depth over the course of the 3 modules. The first is about selecting text and target words, both the selection activities that have some similar characteristics. The second is providing in-depth multimodal instruction, and the third is teaching word learning strategies. You can also watch a member of the panel that put together the What Works Clearinghouse practice guide and see her describe recommendation 1 on YouTube, which is linked here, but there's also a clickable link on our resources website. So today's focus will be on selecting text and target words to support your EL's academic content mastery and English language mastery. The first step in this process is choosing an appropriate text. For any given instructional unit, texts that are in line with or that come from curricular materials should be chosen for both their accessibility and their content richness. There are a lot of different features that we can consider when choosing an appropriate text. The practice guide recommends that we choose texts that are brief, interesting, and engaging for students, that contain a variety of target academic words to focus on, that connect to a given unit of study and build students' knowledge of a topic, that provide sufficient detail and examples for students to be able to comprehend the passage, and that contain ideas that can be discussed from a variety of perspectives. So let's now turn to look at a sample appropriate text that the What Works Clearinghouse practice guide panel has identified as being appropriate for 4th grade readers at a variety of English language proficiency levels. If you would, take a few minutes to review this passage, which was adapted from the American Veterinary Medical Association website, by pausing this video and giving it a quick read. Then we'll come back and discuss. As you may have noticed, this text is appropriate for upper elementary students with moderate to strong levels of English language proficiency and a range of reading abilities. It is at once comprehensible and engaging because it addresses a timely topic that includes many words and ideas that can be depicted visually and also that can ground discussion. All of this is to say that there are lots of interesting features of this text and lots of interesting tidbits that students at various levels of reading skill will be able to access. And in particular, of special value for English learner students, the text offers 2 categories of academic vocabulary, one that is content-specific and one that is domain general. You may have noticed words like natural and health, which are more specific to a scientific instructional context, and then other words like expert and area that are used across content areas in elementary education. Once you have your appropriate text in hand, the next objective is to choose a small set of vocabulary words to teach. As you're thinking about what words to choose and include in this list of targeted instructional words, there are a number of different dimensions that you can consider and try to balance as you're selecting a set that will maximize your students' access to the content that you're teaching and also content across other subject areas. Those characteristics include words that are central to understanding the text, words that are frequently used in the text, words that might appear in other content areas, words that have multiple meanings, words that have affixes, and words that have cross-language potential. So we'll spend most of the rest of this module discussing each of these in more detail and how to select words that meet each of these criteria. So this first criterion, centrality to text, may be at the front of your mind when you think about what words you might teach in the context of a lesson that includes important textual pieces. Words that are central to understanding a text are often bolded by curriculum publishers in order to help teachers guide their instruction toward these critical words. But it's also going to be the case that some words that are important to understanding a text may not be bolded, but they may be good choices for target instructional words as well. So if you had gotten this text that we read previously in a curricular unit, you might find that words like exhibits, environments, and impact are bolded, and so you might want to focus your instruction on those. But there are other words that, if they were not understood by student readers, may really challenge their mastery of the text that they've just encountered. So words like zoo and cages are really central to the core lesson of the text that we've read. Natural is an important feature of the contrast that's being drawn between previous zoo environments and contemporary ones. There are also more illustrative words that might help students grasp the overall picture of a topic text, including soar, which is highlighted here. And then expert also is an important qualification for this John C. Coe, who's cited as being somebody who's in a position of authority. And if you didn't understand the word expert in that context, then it might not make sense why this person's point of view was being pulled in. A related but distinct criterion that you can consider when selecting words to target in your content instruction focused on ELs is the frequency of words' appearance in texts. So it is the case that academic words that appear often are important to target, even if their meaning may seem clear. So as you probably inferred, a key feature of this text here is the contrast between how zoos looked before and how zoos looked now. And that is manifested, among other ways, in the repetition of the discourse marking words before and now that really set up that contrast. And even though those words are familiar probably to most of your students, some of your ELs may not have fully grasped the contrast that those words can reflect, and so it can help to focus on those in instruction. And it also bears mentioning that multiple encounters with a word will help students commit it to memory. So as you're emphasizing these important words that set up the overall structure of this text, you're also keeping in mind that you're helping students get easier access to these words that are really high leverage in this area. Speaking of high leverage words, another criterion that you can consider when selecting words to target in your instruction is whether they're used in other content areas. So the text that we've been focusing on here is probably a science text, but there are lots of words inside of this text that are not unique to science. So some academic words are domain general, as you're well aware, and they may be used across content areas, sometimes in different ways. So understanding these words can help students in your content area and when they read texts in other areas, and it can help them see the slight nuances of differences in meaning that really can vary from content area to content area. So the words that are underlined here but not bolded are words that probably have application outside of science. Exhibit might show up in an art class or in a social studies class if you're talking about museums. Natural shows up in all kinds of instructional areas. And then there are the bolded and underlined words here that are used in meaningfully different ways across content areas. So in this context, we read about cramped cement areas. Obviously, that's some kind of room or some kind of contained space, but area in math has a very different meaning, as it also does in geography. And likewise, we see the author writing about changes having a positive impact on animals' health and happiness. Impact here is a noun, but in other content areas it might be likelier to appear as a verb, like in physics as opposed to this sort of biology lesson. And these kinds of differences in usage that are more systematic across content areas can be revealed to your students and support their mastery of the words applications in those different contexts. The fourth criterion lays most of the emphasis on those multiple meanings. Instead of having cross-content utility, there are words that have importantly differing multiple meanings. Lots of words have related but distinct meanings and usages around content areas like area, as I talked about before, but also volume in English language arts versus science and math. And if we teach these multiple meanings explicitly, that can help students understand how words function in different contexts. And again, the words that are underlined here fall into this category where, depending on the subject that you're discussing and the content area that you're in, they may have different meanings. This next criterion asks us to shift gears a little bit and focuses on the presence of affixes. So words can be altered by adding prefixes or suffixes. As a general category, we call these affixes, and they help us attend to how word parts change a root word. There are two broad categories of how affixes can change a root word. They can change its meaning, so for example, converting like to dislike, its opposite, using a prefix dis, which has a very general application, or the affixes can change a word's grammatical form or function. So grammatical form of singular to plural noun, cage to cages, just by adding the is suffix, or changing the function of a word from a noun to an adjective, going from nature to natural. These prefixes and suffixes have systematic relationships to the root words that they modify, and we see them across texts, even these completely approachable grade level texts for 4th or 5th grader. So we see exhibit has the plural S on it. Different, we may not think of as having an affix, but the ent suffix makes differ a verb into different, an adjective. There's a lot of pluralizing here, so cage to cages, but also turning adjectives into nouns like happiness, and we have nature to natural, and then pace to pacing is also an instance of one of these important morphemes, which is just another word for affixes that can alter importantly the form or function that a word takes in a text. And helping students detect these can help them parse out unfamiliar words, because maybe a student is familiar with the verb differ, but not the adjective different. And if you can help them identify that that ent suffix is doing something, then they can take it off, look at the root, parse it out, give it a semantic representation, give it its meaning, and then make sense of the word as a whole and make, therefore, better sense of the content. And then finally, and this is the most interesting piece, I think, for English learners, is the potential for cross-language relationships when we're selecting vocabulary words to target in our instruction that's focused on supporting EL's achievement. Usually we term these words cognates, so there are lots of words that have cognate relationships across languages, which is to say they share an origin in the history of language, and they retain a similar meaning and sound. And it's really useful to think about choosing cognates in your focus on instruction because it can increase students' confidence. It's true that they tend to be easiest to find in Romance languages like Spanish and Portuguese, but your ELs are likeliest to have Spanish as a home language, and so you can really help them rely on these things. Now, we've underlined here a number of words that have pretty clear, solid cognates in Spanish. Different in Spanish is diferente, animals, animales, gorillas, gorillas. There are these relationships where the sounds are slightly different, the spelling may be different, but overall the structure of the word and the corresponding meaning are shared across the two languages. And so you can help students build on their home language knowledge by drawing their attention to the relationships between languages and the words that are contained within them. So let's take a couple of minutes to try applying those criteria. Here's the full sample text that you read at the beginning of this module, of which I have just been presenting an excerpt, which has had many potential target words underlined and bolded, and we've discussed a lot of different reasons why you would select certain of those words to teach. So let's take a minute and read back through this text again on our own, thinking about which 6 target words we would choose for instruction for the particular grade level that we teach. So looking across the list of 6 words that you selected, reflect on how they meet the criteria that we've been discussing, those 6 different criteria. Now, the What Works Clearinghouse practice guide that we've been referring to throughout contains example selections, and it gives some justifications for the target words that they selected from this text. So you can compare what you chose and see whether the justifications that you gave are similar to or meaningfully different from the justifications that were given in that practice guide. So what are the key takeaways from this module? On one hand, research indicates that there are 6 key word characteristics that should be considered when selecting target words for instruction when it's designed to support EL's content learning and language development. Centrality to understanding a text, frequency of use in a text, likelihood of appearing in other content areas, having multiple meanings, containing affixes, and having cross-language potential. Intentionally selecting texts and target words can help us ensure that ELs are well supported and engaged in their content area lessons. And reflecting on how target vocabulary relates to what students already know, especially from their home language, can generate interest in continuing to master new words that will help them succeed. So for more information on any of the topics that we've discussed today, you can check out the key resource that this presentation draws on, that 2014 What Works Clearinghouse Practice Guide about supporting EL's academic achievement and language development. You can also access parts 2 and 3 of this tutorial, the first on direct instruction and the second on word learning strategies, at our website, which you have access to, but the link is also available here if you need to type it into your browser. And then finally, the REL Southwest team has compiled a rich repository of materials and guides that you can draw from in your collaboration teams. So you can visit, browse, and download our resources at the website linked here. Thank you very much, and we look forward to continuing to work with you in this partnership.